All right. Well, hello everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Bob Cortland, and I'm a senior solutions engineer. And today we're going to be talking about how you can supercharge your capital improvement plans. So let's dive into our agenda. Basically, today we're going to be exploring the concept of a capital improvement plan. We're going to be identifying some of the benefits, some of the challenges that involve with creating these documents. We'll talk about the essential linking between both your capital improvement plan to your year-to-year capital budgets, as well as the linking between kind of higher level decision making at your organizations and that necessary link to the plan itself. We'll also include a proof of concept demonstration about how this can look using the Questica budget product, and we'll follow with some questions and answers and an opportunity to wrap up the discussion. I know the agenda is set for an hour. We're certainly looking to end the content around the 40 to 45 minute mark to offer an opportunity for Q&A, and if there is an opportunity to give people some time back in their day, that's usually not too much of an objection from my experience. So with that kind of housekeeping out of the way, if you do have any questions, please feel free to use the chat function, and we can certainly cover those when we get to that Q&A wrap up near the end of today's session. So diving right in, what is a capital improvement plan? Well, really, we're talking about a strategic document that's going to be used to plan large-scale capital expenditures over some amount of time. Usually, the time scale ranges somewhere between 4 to 6 or 10 years, but this can vary. And the definition of a capital improvement plan can also be fluid because what is and isn't considered a capital improvement plan can vary depending on the organization that we're dealing with. But essentially, this is a living, breathing document that's going to help us, plan for the future and plan infrastructure investments that are going to help deliver on some of the goals and objectives that we have in terms of the capital expenditure side. When we look at the history of capital improvement plans, really depending on how flexible we're being with this definition, we could go all the way back to ancient civilizations. I'm sure the Egyptian pyramids probably took a good amount of foresight and planning to pull off, but in near terms that we can use, the closest example of a historical capital improvement plan actually stems from the National Resources Planning Board, which was created in the United States by Franklin Roosevelt in 1934. And the purpose of this board was to establish and align spending with the natural resources available to the country at the time, because of course the 1930s were a period of Great Depression. So it took a lot of planning and foresight to be able to use what resources were available, which were extremely limited at the time. This board actually adopted several planning practices and recommended a 4 to 6 year plan, which is something that we continue to see today with the capital improvement plans that you'll see amongst different public sector organizations. We usually see something around that range in order to properly plan for the future. And in terms of the different types of capital improvement plans, there is no one way to build a capital improvement plan. So you'll see unlimited variations of similar concepts. And you'll also see some planning and strategic documents done by all different types of organizations. For the purposes of today's session, we'll be mostly focusing on public sector organizations, but especially larger private firms can also have their own concepts of capital improvement planning. Companies that are building new headquarters and new offices and things like that certainly could still adopt some of these practices. But for the purposes of today, we're going to be focused more around public sector capital improvement plans, which would include, different levels of government as well as, education, healthcare, and other types of public sector organizations. So what are the benefits of having a capital improvement plan? Well, first and foremost, we want to improve strategic decision-making within our organization. By having kind of a systematic way to plan and align priorities and strategic decisions with the future, we have improved just strategic decision making as an organization. By tying these different parts of the plan to desired outcomes, we can also see exactly how effective the plan has been over time, so that if we need to adjust and change our decision making as an organization, a CIP is an example of a document that's going to inform those decisions by the different stakeholders over time. And in terms of allocating resources, it would be nice if we had infinite resources, but ultimately we're going to have to balance the priorities of different outcomes and different goals when we're dealing with limited resources, which is the case for every organization. So how can we better align the limited resources we have with the outcomes that we are looking to achieve in terms of capital expenditures? Accountability as well is going to be increased with a formalized plan, because if you have a plan, the people that were responsible for building, implementing, and monitoring that plan can also be held to account when things either go awry or be rewarded with success when the plan's achieved and those goals that were set forth are honored. CIP can also be a great tool for public engagement. You can share the plan with the general public, as well as gather feedback on the different plan elements, which can actually be foundational to the building of the plan itself. So the community that you're looking to serve by building a plan like this in the first place can also be more engaged by having a formalized capital improvement plan in place at the organizational level. And by having a formalized CIP, we can also enhance the financial planning aspect, which is a huge component of an effective plan. Naturally, these types of capital expenditures are going to require a lot of investment, and this investment needs to be tracked over time. There also needs to be the necessary revenues to support the expenses that these projects are going to incur. And these projects tend to be very long-term, in some cases in length, which is why forecasting of future expenses and future revenue impacts is essential to having an effective capital improvement plan. And then in terms of streamlining your project proposals, as well as your delivery of the projects that you look to actually support, by having a formalized capital improvement plan, you can streamline and standardize exactly what these things look like. What does a proposal need to include? And then once we've just chosen a proposal to move forward with, how are we going to deliver on the projects that we've chosen to support? What are the key dates? Who are the key stakeholders and the managers of the projects that we need to hold to account? All of these things should be components of a formal capital improvement plan. And these plans never happen in a vacuum. A good capital improvement plan is going to increase visibility, transparency, as well as coordination and foster collaboration between your different stakeholders that are involved in creating the plan, managing the plan, and monitoring the plan over time. So what should we put in a plan? Now, we could go with a lot of different definitions, and these are flexible. These are fluid concepts. So as an organization, you can decide what does and doesn't belong in a capital improvement plan. But if we're going to lean on the GFOA's definition, it's any expenditure that exceeds $5,000. So anything above that should be considered a line item or a item or a project within a capital improvement plan. Anything under that $5,000 threshold, we can probably just incorporate into our annual budget. But generally speaking, we're talking about large capital purchases and things that are going to be, financially significant to the organization over time. So that's why we're building this planning document, to be able to keep track of all of these different expenses throughout their life cycle. So the first thing you need to do when you're building your capital improvement plan is to define your different types of projects that you're looking to kind of track and manage within this document. So what are the different types of projects that we administer? This can greatly change depending on the type of organization you're in. We may have a project type called new bridges or new roads or parking lots or buildings. But each of these can have their own specific definitions depending on how you want to categorize and organize the project types that you're looking to manage within this plan. So if this hasn't been formalized, this is a good opportunity to kind of systematically categorize the different types of projects that you have as an organization. And then each project type could have its own kind of key set of criteria that you're looking to manage when you're looking to link these projects to overall outcomes or desired success in some area. So once we have a handle on those project types and we have our definitions in place, then we can start to establish the different timelines and key milestones associated with each of these different types of projects. So what is the timeline for, building a new highway? Well, this could involve a planning phase. This could involve a start of construction phase. This could also involve a maintenance mode phase because we need to make sure we're maintaining that highway over time. So we need to systematically not only scope out the timelines of the projects, but also associate these key milestones with each project. And your milestones may change depending on the type of project that it is. If it's a new equipment type project, there's not really any construction phase associated with that. So those milestones may be different than our highway example. And of course, then we have to cost these things out. What is our new highway going to cost? Well, we might have labor hours, we might have materials costs, we may have equipment costs or rentals that we need to account for. So we need to be as detailed as possible so that we're making sure to incorporate all the different costs that are going to come as a result of a potential project proposal that's on our desk. And these costs can extend not just to our capital budget each year, but also to our operating budgets. So are we impacting things like grants or funds within the operating budget? Are we pulling headcount away from people that would normally be assigned to our operating budget? We need to make sure that we're costing out those impacts on the operational side so that we can also include that element as we're doing our financial planning exercises for the future. And to do a full financial planning exercise, we need to not only account for expenses, but also revenue sources. So what are the funds that we're going to draw on to support our capital projects? Do we have a capital budget? Do we have discretionary or auxiliary funding sources that we can draw upon? These things all need to be factored in when we make sure we have enough money set aside to accomplish what we're setting out to accomplish. And keep in mind that potential revenues can come as a result of some of these projects in some cases. So let's plan that for that aspect or component as well. If we're building a new transit system, then we could potentially charge passengers to use it. So do those potential revenues outweigh the costs that would be associated with building that new system? This is the way that we can start to build the business case for building that transit system versus something else that we might choose instead. And by factoring all of these different components into all of your different types of projects, we need to come up with a way to prioritize which projects are going to ultimately get funding and be included in the plan versus the ones that maybe not. Maybe they're tabled for a future year, or maybe they're scrapped entirely, depending on what that process looks like. So is there a way to systematically prioritize one type of project, or even within a project type, one potential project proposal versus another? If you don't have an objective and systematic way to do that, then the capital improvement plan isn't being used to its full extent. Ideally, we want an objective way to prioritize our projects, and the way to do that is to connect it to your overall strategy as an organization. So if you've already developed a formalized strategic plan as an organization, then that can be used to directly influence and prioritize your methodology when building your capital improvement plan. For example, if my goal as an organization as a strategic plan was to increase mobility of my community, well, now I can start to prioritize those projects that are going to have those desired outcomes. Maybe I do want to build that new highway, or maybe I look at my transit system, or maybe I look at alternative transportation things like bike paths or other potential projects that could all increase mobility. Well, now we can start to even more systematically break that down. What are the key pillars of how we measure increasing mobility? What are the projects that are going to increase those measures or those KPIs the most? as an organization, that's going to give me a more objective way to determine, which mobility projects are going to have the biggest, bang for the buck. Now, naturally, there's a lot of challenges that can come with building ACIP in the first place. Now, there's certainly more than 3, but we're going to call out 3 in particular today. First example of a challenge when building a capital improvement plan is just inefficient workflows. Who are the key stakeholders that are involved in building the plan in the first place? Do we have a systematic or automated way to gather that input from these stakeholders? And is there a lot of inefficient workflow in terms of silos of information? Does one department know what projects it's doing versus the other departments, which may be trying to do the same thing, but they don't talk to each other. So we have a lot of duplication of effort, or we have a lot of manual effort that's involved in either filling out paper forms or uploading and downloading spreadsheets from different enterprise systems. Which leads directly to our next challenge, which is just outdated technology. Many people are basically building their capital improvement plans using a combination of Excel spreadsheets, Word documents, maybe PowerPoint presentations. And this is going to, result in a lot of, classical technology problems like version control, like, just human error, and outdated technology can exacerbate the inefficient workflows that the first challenge presents. And then that third challenge is really critical because lack of stakeholder engagement is going to weaken the plan, because if we don't get input from all the necessary people that need to have input, then the plan is going to have some holes or some gaps in terms of its scope. And this extends at the bottom level to sometimes necessary community engagement. That should be an absolute component, because how can you properly rank and prioritize your goals for a community if you're not gathering direct feedback from said community? So we need a mechanism to be able to capture community engagement and also to systematically build that engagement into the plan itself. And then in terms of the top level of the plan, we also need to be able to monitor and keep track in terms of accountability of our stakeholders that are responsible for executing the plan itself. Are our project managers transparently able to keep updates and share details about the projects that they're administering? Do senior decision makers have a say in monitoring and making sure that your projects are being delivered on time, on budget? These are challenges that absolutely need to be addressed if your plan is to be successful. So how do we overcome some of these challenges? Well, first and foremost, let's engage our stakeholders. Let's have a way to actually meaningfully incorporate feedback from the community level, from the people who are going to most be affected by this plan. If I want to increase mobility in my community, let's do things like have public surveys. Let's have town hall meetings. Let's have online portals where they can give feedback on how best to prioritize or rank our different mobility projects. This is a great way that we can start to incorporate these aspects within the plan itself. And this also gives us direct feedback mechanisms for the plan once it's put into motion, because stakeholders might have some say in the plan initially when it's created, but over time, do we also collect feedback on how the plan's going? Are we actually achieving the desired incomes that our community said we wanted to achieve when the plan was first constructed? And of course, we're going to be balancing the needs and priorities of different parts of that community. So we do need to adopt a formal way to prioritize the different projects that we potentially could do. There is virtually no limit to the potential capital projects that you could undertake as an organization. So we need a way to classify, organize, and then prioritize which ones will have the best benefit for the costs when we factor in all of these different components. And of course, those costs are going to result in a plan for funding these projects. How much money do we have to spend in a given year, in a given 5-year term, in a given 10-year term? We need to correctly plan for the future so that there is actually an economic way to support these projects and that these are actually feasible economically. It'd be great to build 10 new airports, but maybe that's not going to be economically feasible for someone to actually do. And then overcoming some of these challenges, a lot of this just comes down to monitoring and mechanisms to analyze the plan in motion. So how are our budgets doing? What does the capital spend look like? What is our actual versus budget year to date? Those types of reports and analysis are going to be integral to making sure that you're on track, that your project managers are delivering what they're obligated to deliver. And how is the plan doing? Do we need to make adjustments over time? By modernizing technology, a lot of this can be automated. So you can have systems to flag things if they exceed a certain threshold, or allow your decision makers to be kept up to date with how their projects are doing, so that if they need to make some changes or move some money around, they have that information at their fingertips, so they're able to make those necessary changes when and if they happen. All right, and then there are separate concepts between a capital improvement plan and your year-to-year capital budget. So the capital improvement plan is a more long-range strategic document, whereas the capital budget is the actual dollars and cents that you're setting aside to actually implement the plan from one year to the next. So we need, and ideally we do have, a direct link between the plan itself and the budget, but we also need a lot of flexibility between these two things, because if you have a 5-year plan, a lot's going to change over those 5 years. So materials costs could skyrocket, or the price of fuel could fluctuate, or the price of labor could change drastically, which may require some rebalancing of your priorities, which may really necessitate some recalculation of particular projects, and perhaps change the actual funding of these projects from one year to the next. This does present challenges, because anytime you open up flexibility, the more you deviate from that plan in the first place, obviously, then there are some challenges with that. Why did we, scrap these potential projects, which were so, heavily popular a couple of years ago? Well, now you need to explain potentially why that needed to happen. But these challenges are far outweighed by the benefits of having that, senior level kind of strategic document guide the year-to-year capital budget. It can still have the same impact in terms of reprioritization of one project type over another. And it can also give you that visibility to make those informed changes over time, so that you don't just make a plan and stick to it no matter what. We need to be more informed over time as our plan evolves, as these projects are delivered. We also need those mechanisms to make sure that we are getting the desired outcomes that we set out to achieve. Is mobility increasing after we built our new highway? Well, we should have some measures in there to track over time, so that you can actually link the projects itself with the desired outcomes or KPIs that you're looking to keep track of, to ensure that these are actually being effective in the long run. Okay, so with that out of the way, I'm going to jump over now to a quick demonstration that I have set up to kind of show some of these different elements in action. Now, this particular example, I'm going to pull up an example of a demonstration site that we have set up. So this is a dashboard that's going to show me all of my capital projects, and this is actually an example of one of our customers on the West Coast. So I can see this is a function of my capital improvement plan. I'm able to also see an interactive map of all the different projects that I'm administering within this particular site. So I can click on any of these to see a breakdown in terms of details of all the project information, including budget to complete, impacts to the operating budget, and expenses associated with the different projects that we are administering. The idea here is we want you to be able to transparently share this information with the general public. We also want your project owners to be able to go and navigate their particular portfolio of projects that they are responsible for. So we're going to be focusing entirely on Questiga's capital module, which is designed to help your different stakeholders work and build out your capital budget and it can incorporate all the different elements of the capital improvement plan that we just covered. So if I want to look at a list of all of my projects, whoops, let me just reset here. Bear with me 1 second. Looks like Google Chrome just threw me a curveball. Apologies, everyone. All right, while I load that back up, basically what I'm going to show is a categorization of all of my different projects across my portfolio. So you are able to actually define within Questica Budget all the different types and categories of projects that you have. And you're also able to categorize the different components of the plan. So what are the key milestones? What are the different elements that I need to include in my plan? And what are the other elements that need to be accounted for as well? So when we talk about milestones, timelines, as well as forecast our different expenses and budgets, these are the elements that we need to incorporate. Apologies with this site, looks like there's an error, so I'm actually gonna load up a second site, which will take a minute, so apologies for that kind of hiccup. Now, while that's the case, do we have any questions in chat so far? If so, please log those in and we can take a quick look and address those while we wait for our site to load up. All right, looks like we're back. Apologies, everyone. I don't know, I think someone else was on the same server and kicked me off, but let me pull my example back. I'm going to load all the project details that we have, and now each project is going to have its own set of information according to the templates that you've designed for each project type. So you'll see examples of like parks and fire and facilities projects. Each one is going to have its own set of criteria and details that we're going to use when we talked about categorizing the different capital projects that we have. And these are all going to be incorporated into each project proposal, so that if I want to go to an example of a project, for example, we've got our bicycle master plan project. This is going to contain all the details that are necessary for us to build our bicycle plan project, as well as carry out whatever approvals are necessary in terms of the workflow that's going to be used to determine which projects we're going to move forward with and which aren't. You'll notice that we're midway currently through our approval process. So we've already had our department user propose the project, as well as pass through a manager review. We are currently at a director review stage, meaning that I have the ability to both promote this further along the approval process or potentially demote this back to a prior stage. I may see something in this proposal that doesn't sit well with me. I want to send this back to my department user. This could automatically trigger things like notifications when we move from one stage to the next, or when a project is promoted or demoted. Questica can send emails with links. We can also create calendar events. If you have things like committees or councils or executives that need to meet at specific points of the capital budget development process. And you can see that we can also capture descriptive or non-financial data as well. Each project template allows us to create as many different fields as we want so that we can categorize all those different types of projects that we have. And each project type could have its own template so that if I'm proposing a new bridge, I may have a different set of information that I want to include for versus, building a new building or, refreshing the servers in my IT department, whatever that might be. We can also allow you to establish different regions within your jurisdiction. So if we want to have a geographic element, not only do we have that interactive map of where in the world the project's taking place, but we can also allow you to establish which projects are going to be serving which regions. Especially helpful if you want kind of a grand look at the entire budget as a whole. And keep in mind, each project can link to its department level budget. So in this case, if I'm part of a public works or an engineering or a transportation department, I could link to the budget view that's looking at all of my different transportation projects across my portfolio rather than, in this case, just looking at a single one. And in terms of that ranking system, how you score your projects is going to be, of course, completely unique to your organization, but this is a way that we can actually build out specific objective scoring matrices so that each user or each stakeholder that's involved in reviewing this proposal is able to go through and assess a relative mark of each score. So, what does this get out of 10 in this case? Or if I want to change the relative weights, this is going to be guided by our, greatest prioritization needs as an institution. We may decide that, active living is a major emphasis or point of strength, so I could assign a much higher weight to a particular area of the score than another. And then my committees, my executives can review this, assess the score, and we're going to be left with an overall project rank, which could inform, ultimately, are we going to support this bike path project or not? Project milestones, we talked about earlier. We need to be able to keep track of key milestones, like when does the project planning phase start? When does construction start? When is that complete? Are there things like inspections that we need to factor in to this particular type of project? We want to keep track of those milestones because these can be essential for unlocking specific revenues or specific expenses when those points of time are reached. And even cosmetic things. What are the images? What is this bike path going to look like when we're complete? This is the type of detail that you can ultimately choose to share with your stakeholders, with your communities, because Questiga allows for any information logged in the capital module to be transparently shared through our open book transparency portal. And you can also have a digital budget book as well, which can contain all the same types of collateral. So project images, descriptions, any other documentation you want to upload with the project proposal can also be included, even things like AutoCAD drawings or proprietary softwares, no problem. We can allow you to upload whatever file types you'd like, as well as have that interactive map of where the project is physically taking place. This can be done either manually by me drawing where the project might be, or if you have a GIS system like Esri, for example, we can incorporate the latitude and longitude coordinates from GIS systems to help plot out the different points of the plan, whether it's a building or in this case a roadway. We can get as granular as you want using an open source version of Google Maps. And then when we start looking big picture at the actual financial side of the project, of this proposal in this case, because we are still pre-approval, we allow you to get as granular as possible when we're plotting out multiple years. Every expense and every revenue source should be accounted for, and Questiga allows you to go through and associate each expense and revenue source with its particular project phase. So we can split our budget up into the different areas or categories of spend. We can also reorganize this grid so that we're looking at everything based on the phase of the project. And we can do any other types of forecasting that you want. So if I need to add a new expense, or in this case, a new revenue source, we could add $5,000 of extra revenue. And now instead of running a deficit in 2024, we will have a very modest surplus associated with it. So if we are looking to balance the multiple phases or the multiple years of the capital budget, we might choose to do that at the project level. We might choose to do that at the department level or the entire capital budget level. So if your goal is to balance out the capital budget year to year, we're going to want to see, zeros across the board. So I can increase my expenses to accommodate, and we can have a perfectly balanced budget. Or in this case, it's off by $1. You might ask why. The reason is that we actually have a calculation that's being done for this particular budget, for this particular project. So we have created a formula to calculate inflation, and that's going to draw upon an inflation variable, which of course is going to change every year. So as inflation goes up and down, our inflation calculation will also go up and down. And you can see that we're setting aside $45,000 in the current year to adjust for inflation. But we may have other types of capital specific calculations that we want the system to do for us. We may want to calculate things like the depreciation of an asset. We may want to take out a loan to support this project. Well, what are the terms of that loan? How do we calculate what our monthly repayment schedule looks like? Essentially, any type of formulas or calculations that you're doing in a system like Excel, for example, we can build into Questica to allow the system to kind of streamline how these calculations are done, and then also make it easier for your project owners to put in, their input. We're taking out a loan of this size. This is the interest rate. I don't expect them to necessarily be financial experts, so we can create these templates to make it very easy to do some large scale calculations. And it could also be something like, that road resurfacing example. If we're building a road, how many square feet or square miles is it? Then we'll be able to calculate things like labor costs, materials costs, and other ways that you might have of estimating what a road resurfacing project looks like. And that could look differently from a park to anything else that we're building. So essentially any types of mundane math, like the ability to copy certain expenses forward, the ability to distribute your costs throughout a given year, the ability to adjust things up or down. So if we're 10% over budget, I may just want to select all of my expenses and make some kind of an adjustment up or down. So we can help your kind of decision makers keep tabs on the budget, on the forecast, and we can also sync up with your enterprise systems to bring over your actual costs over time. What were my actuals when I look at this particular project? And do I want this either just to look at in a screen like this, or do I want to run a formal report showing all of my expenses versus revenues, all of my budget versus actuals? Any other types of reports that we want to schedule, we can actually set up so that your project owners are automatically emailed these reports on a continuous basis. And the other thing I'll mention here is that proposals can involve multiple versions, multiple scenarios that are built out. So when I'm building out this bicycle master plan project, I may have additional scenarios that I want to build. In fact, I could create a brand new scenario entirely from scratch. I have built another scenario here called extra grant, where maybe we receive an extra grant for funding, and maybe I want to plot out those potential expenses for the situation where we receive the grant or we don't. And I can flip back and forth between multiple scenarios. You can see here I can take copies or take snapshots of a project proposal in action. And I'm also able to run a quick report saying what's the difference between scenario A and scenario B. Because potentially I have multiple vendors that are looking to bid on one of these projects. Well, maybe they have different kind of pricing fees and structures and costs. So you should have that big picture ability to say, what if we went with vendor A versus vendor B versus vendor C? And we can do these same types of scenarios and analysis at the macro level rather than, in this case, just the one project level. You may choose to run a scenario that applies to your entire capital budget, or you may want to run a scenario that only applies to one department or one group of projects, like in this case, transportation. And we also want you to keep tabs on any other type of data that you're looking to track when you're monitoring the long-term success of your capital improvement plan. So examples would be statistical information. How many cyclists do we have on our pathway? How many, you know, what are other types of stats that we want to keep track of? How many materials were used? How many, labor hours were consumed? You can actually absorb whatever type of statistical information you want. And then this could also be a component of the reports that you're looking to run. If the ultimate goal of this pathway project is to increase the amount of cyclists or cyclist options, how do we track and measure that success? We can give you the ability to upload that statistical data within the statistical ledger, or we can also allow you to take advantage of Questiga's performance module, which can allow you to build in any other types of KPIs and programs that you're looking to measure. So do I have a mobility program? Do I have a public health type program? We can allow you to build those types of things all with their own KPIs and measures and metrics so that we can assess the relative impact that we're having over time. Did the outcomes that we desired when we set out to build this project actually get achieved? Are those different metrics and measures that we're using to determine success, are those actually being realized or not? But ultimately, we want your users to be able to kind of manage their projects, to be able to cost out all the detailed costs in terms of both expenses and revenues, and then to analyze and report on the capital budgets and on your overall capital improvement plan over time. Is it being effective? Are we getting the right stakeholder engagement to make sure that the plan's being articulated in full? And who are these different stakeholders? Do we have a streamlined and automated way to gather their inputs? Our department users may be the genesis of many proposals. Other proposals might come as a result of one of those, public-facing type of meetings that we have set up, whether it's surveys, whether it's town halls, whether it's any different type of feedback mechanisms that you might have as an organization. And then finally, do we want to take all of this information and share it back with the general public? Here's this plan that we've worked on collaboratively, and here's how we're tracking the relative impact of that plan over time. Here's the different, goalposts that we're looking to measure so that we're held accountable at the end of the day for how successful the plan's been. And of course, if you're, directly electing and having elections, then having a well-articulated and analyzed plan can be a great way to get reelected or to kick out an incumbent that may not have been as effective in the planning process in their desired outcomes. So quick proof of concept demonstration there. I said I would leave around 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. So let me shift back to my PowerPoint very quickly. And then for any kind of feedback, if anyone would like a copy of this deck, please feel free to reach out to me directly. Any questions and answers, now is a great time. If we have any in the chat, we'll take a quick peek as well. But otherwise, if you don't have any questions or answers, if you do think of any, please feel free to send me an email. Or if you'd like to do a more targeted session for yourself or your team, always happy to work with you to set that sort of thing up. But thank you all very much for your time. And if you need to drop off, happy to give everyone 15 minutes back in their calendar. Okay, question. Will the presentation materials be shared with the group? Absolutely. I will work with Serena, who's on the marketing side, who organized this, and we can send a follow-up kind of email thanking everyone, and we can include this deck and any other materials along with that. I believe we have a blog post that kind of goes over this concept at a high level as well. All right, perfect. Well, Serena's saying no other questions. So again, if anyone does think of anything after the fact, please feel free to reach out. And with that, thanks everyone. And hopefully this was helpful for everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.